Good morning. Glad you're with us again this morning. If you remember last week we talked about how Jesus was raised in Nazareth, and you can go back to chapter 2 and see how he got there. If you remember, Herod, the king, is going to kill all baby boys 2 years and under in an effort to try to kill Jesus. And his parents find out about that. God supernaturally alerts them to this, and they flee to Egypt. Well, once Herod was dead, they came back, but instead of going back to Bethlehem, they go to Nazareth. So when Jesus is about to start his ministry, there in Matthew chapter 4, it says he went back to Nazareth. So in Matthew chapter 4, verses 12 and 13, when he heard that John the Baptist had been put in prison, he withdrew to Galilee. Then leaving Nazareth, he went and lived at Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali. Now last week we talked about that prophecy in Isaiah chapter 9, but we stopped before we got to Matthew 4:17. So I want us to continue on, and beginning in Matthew 4, verse 17. It says, "From that time on, Jesus began to preach, 'Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near.'" So this really is the beginning of Jesus' ministry. All this other stuff that we have been reading about in Matthew is building up to Jesus' ministry. And he's alerting us to all of this background information that we need to know before we move into Matthew's account of Jesus' ministry. And we understand why Matthew quoted the prophecy of Naphtali and Zebulun and why Jesus went up to Galilee. But why did Matthew mention Nazareth? I mean, what is so special about Nazareth? He didn't have to mention that Jesus went to Nazareth and stayed there before he went to Capernaum. Why did he feel it necessary to mention Nazareth? Well, if you look at a map of the Promised Land in Jesus' day, we can see Nazareth is located in Galilee. And if we really focus in on Nazareth, we can see something very important. And that is its proximity to the Jezreel Valley and all the surrounding areas. So here we can see Nazareth right there in red. And below Nazareth, you can see along that river, it says the Jezreel Valley. Now, if you look over on the west edge, there's Mount Carmel. Then follow that lowland all the way to the Jordan River, and we've passed through, at that point, the plain of Esdraelon and the valley of Jezreel. Now, it's important that we understand all this so we can understand why Matthew is even bringing this up. Esdraelon is a Greek derivation of the Hebrew word Yitzrael. And this literally means, may God make fruitful. And this name, Esdraelon, is an allusion then to the fertility of the area. This area was among the most fertile areas in all of this region. It's really a dislocation of some former mountains that had sunk down due to tectonic movement in the Earth's crust. See, there's really a mountain range right here, but this one area has sunk down. In fact, if you continue to look at that map, Mount Tabor, Mount Gilboa, and Mount Carmel are remnants of this mountainous area. But right in the middle of these mountains is a triangle-shaped valley that was known for its incredible fertility. In addition to being such an incredibly fertile region that can grow pretty much anything, the valley was part of a major trade route that was known as the Via Maris. The Via Maris trade route went through this region. So because of that fertility of the region and because of its value as a means of being able to control and tax trade, the money that you would get from that, it was a highly prized region that had been fought over for centuries. In Joshua chapter 17, verse 16, we can see that the Canaanites at that time held the area. It says, the people of Joseph replied, the whole country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots fitted with iron, both those in Beth-shan and its settlements, and those in the valley of Jezreel. So the Canaanites were living there and controlling that area at that particular time. We can see in Judges 6 and 7, Gideon's army defeated the Midianites and the Amalekites right there in that area. This is the same place that Saul and Jonathan were killed fighting the Philistines to control. In fact, in many ways, the land surrounding this valley, all of this area, has been a battleground that has determined the very course of civilization. At least 34 very bloody battles have been fought in this ancient site over the last 4,000 years. Nations like the Egyptians, the Canaanites, the Israelites, the Midianites, the Amalekites, the Philistines, the Hasmoneans, the Greeks, the Romans, the Muslims, the Crusaders, the Mongols, the French, the Ottomans, the British, the Australians, Germans, Arabs, Israelis, they've all fought and died for that particular land. Generals that you may have heard of, Thutmose III, the Egyptian general, Deborah Barak, leaders found in the Old Testament that led God's armies, Gideon, Saul and Jonathan, Shishak, Jehu, Joram, Jezebel, Josiah, Antiochus, Ptolemy, Vespasian, Saladin, Napoleon. These are just a few of the major famous generals that have fought battles there. But there are two cities to the north edge of this valley that make this passage in Matthew so important. First is Nazareth, which we've already seen is where Jesus grew up. Now, Jesus grew up about 8 miles north of this valley. In fact, this is the view of the Jezreel Valley from Mount Precipice at Nazareth. So if you're standing there at that mountain, right there at Nazareth, you could look out over the Jezreel Valley. Jesus grew up looking out over this valley that held the blood of thousands of wounded and dead. But there's another city associated with this valley, and that is the city of Megiddo. And here is the view of Nazareth from Megiddo. So you can see, standing at Megiddo, looking across the Jezreel Valley, you can actually see Nazareth. Megiddo is built on this high region that in the Hebrew is known as a har. Now, what is a har? A har is an elevated region, an elevated area where cities have been built and torn down and rebuilt and torn down over the centuries. So there's something there, maybe fertile land or a water source or something, and people build a city there. And they live there, and over time the city is destroyed, and winds blow the sands, and the sands begin to pile up there, and the people, new people, come to the area. It still has the water there, the fertile land, and they decide to rebuild the city. So they flatten it all out and build the city back up, and they live there for a while, and over time it is destroyed, and sand gets blown onto the area, and more people move in and rebuild the city, and over time, just layer after layer, this elevated region known as a har develops. This is where Megiddo was situated. And it's interesting that this area was known as Har Megiddo. Now you may say, I get it. Jesus grew up in an area that was the site of battles over the last 4,000 years. And that's true, he was. But folks, it's more than that. If we go back to the end of the story, Revelation chapter 16, verse 16, we are looking at or reading what John is seeing in his vision, where the final bowls of wrath are being poured out. And it says in Revelation 16, beginning of verse 12, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, to prepare the way for the kings from the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are demonic spirits, performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world, to assemble them for the battle on the great day of God the Almighty. In other words, if you've ever heard of the great battle that is mentioned in Revelation, where Jesus will finally destroy evil, this is the battle that is being discussed in Revelation 16. And in verse 16 it says, and they assembled them at the place that in the Hebrew is called Armageddon, or Har-Megiddo. You see, John in Revelation is telling us something about this battle. Like so many other battles in this area, this battle that John is talking about is a battle that would determine the course of human history. In fact, it's a battle that will determine the very course of all lives who have ever lived. It's the final battle between good and evil. And who is going to be the victorious general of that battle? The little boy that grew up in Nazareth, looking out over the field, knowing that one day he would be the one that would bring an end to the evil of the devil and his followers. And that region, right there, would symbolize that victory. Matthew is already helping us to connect this character in his story, Jesus, with this battle between good and evil. And he is informing us about how this Messiah would play a crucial role in the victory of that battle. Matthew wants you as his reader today to know this, to remember this. It doesn't matter what battles you're fighting today. Maybe you've got financial battles or economic battles or social battles or family battles. Matthew is saying, stand firm, stand strong. Your general is very familiar with the battles you fight. He grew up, metaphorically, looking out over all that battlefield. And he's coming back one day to a place that he knows intimately well to deliver you. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.